In a video interview, Dr. Kevin Robertson stated that you can't kill an elephant or a Cape buffalo with just energy. He said that you can kill a leopard or a white-tailed deer with energy, but you need momentum to kill larger animals like elephants. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Kevin Robertson is someone who has a lot of experience on the topic of terminal ballistics. He has authored the book The Perfect Shot, and he is a professional African hunter. The point I want to make here is that with very large animals like elephants and Cape buffalo, it's not momentum that actually kills, it's penetration and damage to vitals. You can have a heavy bullet with lots of momentum, but if that bullet completely fragments on impact and does not reach anything important, high momentum has accomplished nothing. Momentum and penetration are related, but they are definitely not the same thing. If you want to reach the brain of an elephant and kill it, you need penetration. I want you to look at the two rounds highlighted in purple. We can see that the 375 H&H has less momentum and greater penetration than the 458 Win Mag. The reason, of course, is because you need less momentum to drive a smaller diameter bullet the same distance as a larger diameter bullet. If you look at the round in yellow, we can see that the 375 H&H bullet with the same momentum has increased penetration when the twist rate has increased. At the bottom of the chart, there is a quote about how increasing the velocity of the 458 Win Mag had made it from a caliber that was somewhat inadequate to a caliber that was now totally reliable on elephants. By increasing its velocity and therefore momentum, you can overcome the greater resistance that the 458 Win Mag bullet encounters. As a quick side note, Randy Garrett of Garrett Cartridges has found that with a non-expanding Hornady 4570 round, penetration will stop increasing in wetpack after the bullet reaches about 1300 feet per second. Now, wetpack isn't ballistics gelatin or animal tissue, but it shows the interesting point that with soft targets, more velocity will actually dramatically reduce velocity after a point. All of these rules apply to handgun bullets as well. All of these bullets are of the same kind, total full metal jackets, so we can show that the 45 ACP has quite a bit more momentum than the 9mm round, and yet the 9mm has far more penetration than the 45. If you look below the main chart there, we also have the penetration of these rounds when shot into 5 centimeters of Douglas fir before impacting ballistics gel. Again, the 9mm has much more penetration than the 45. The 40 Smith & Wesson actually has slightly more penetration in this case than the 9. I say slightly more because 5mm is not that much of a difference. Even farther down, we have the penetration of these rounds when shot into 5 centimeters of oak in front of ballistics gel. Again, the 40 Smith & Wesson has 5mm more penetration than the 9mm. If I were to guess why this is happening, it'd be because that the 40 Smith & Wesson has a flat nose and the 9mm has a round nose. A flatter nose gives better penetration in ballistics gel. Even though the 40 Smith & Wesson wasn't good at penetrating through wood, it makes up for this in the gelatin part. I do not consider the 40 Smith & Wesson's flat nose to be an unfair comparison either, because it's simply a part of the design of the cartridge. You'll find that many 40 caliber full metal jackets have a flat nose where a 9mm of the same design would have a round nose. This penetration testing in very dense ballistics gel was done by Alan Bristow. He doesn't say what sort of ratio he was using, but it was dense enough to stop a 230 grain 45 ACP full metal jacket round after 6.5 inches of penetration. Even more surprising, that 45 full metal jacket was starting to expand some. I don't believe this gelatin represents anything in particular, I just mentioned it because it was interesting and another way to compare penetration in a very dense organic substance. You've probably noticed how I didn't use any of these facts to conclude that 458 Win Mag or 45 ACP were bad calibers. That would be a ridiculous conclusion to make, especially when you consider the fact that for a long time, most 9mm jacketed hollow points were lacking penetration and most 45s had good enough penetration. Thankfully, times have changed, and now we have both good 9mm hollow points and good non-expanding 458 Win Mag rounds. It's undeniable that a 458 Win Mag does more damage than a 375 H&H, and a 45 will do more damage than a 9mm. However, it's hard to say how this increase of damage relates into different outcomes. The problem that we have is that the ultimate measure of effectiveness, how long an animal takes to die after being shot, is not easy to get. I've watched dozens of Cape buffalo hunts at this point to see what sort of difference, if any, there is between the 375 H&H and 458 Win Mag. However, largely due to the nature of filming a dangerous game hunt, and because many of the videos were edited, I could not tell if there was any difference on average between these two calibers. What I can tell you for sure is that shot placement is the majority of what determines effectiveness. I can also tell you that smaller calibers like 9.3mm and 375 H&H do not require more shots to kill, and they certainly don't result in having more animals lost. For most people, this will be enough to convince them that a 458 Win Mag or 458 Lot is not absolutely necessary for dangerous game. If you already own a 458 Win Mag, I'm definitely not going to discourage you from using it either. I would also like to state the fact that, generally speaking, minimum caliber requirements are arbitrary and not based off any real-world effectiveness, which is why certain laws will prevent you from using perfectly effective calibers. By the way, the time it takes for an animal to die is an inherently objective thing. It is measurable and not open to interpretation because something is either alive or not. Effectiveness should definitely not be measured by an animal's response to being shot, as that is largely a psychological reaction and is much more of a subjective thing to judge. As for handgun rounds, as far as I know, no one has directly compared the amount of time modern hollow points in 9mm and 45 take to kill a given animal. What most people will do is make the assumption that a 45 is significantly more effective than 9mm, given the fact that it can inflict greater damage. Making assumptions is a fundamentally dangerous thing. If you assume that expansion is more important than penetration, for example, you will end up with Winchester Silvertips lacking effectiveness in the Miami-Dade shootout. So I'd like to do a bit of a comparison here. One deer was shot with a 44 Magnum 225 grain hollow point, and another was shot with a 9mm. The 9mm round in question here was of a fracturing design, so the petals came off at a relatively shallow depth, and the base gives relatively deep penetration with no expansion. The 44 mag took roughly 25 seconds to kill, and the 9mm took roughly 27 seconds to kill. This obviously isn't an apples to apples comparison because we have different projectiles and different barrel lengths. So in a gunfight where one man has a large caliber handgun like a 44 and another man has a 9mm, they may die at the same time if they happen to shoot each other at the same time. Greater effectiveness is not guaranteed then when you switch to a larger handgun round. What is a guarantee is that there is an increase in recoil. For a lot of people, increased recoil reduces practical accuracy. So if recoil is not hindering your accuracy and you just like 45 more than 9mm, by all means use 45. However, if you can't shoot a 45 as well as a 9mm, it would be wise to use a 9mm, because that's the caliber you as a person will be more effective with. In comparison, if you were shooting goats in the heart with the .22 Hornet, you would obviously notice that the goats are taking a considerably longer time to die than the deer shot with common handgun rounds. You would also notice that an expanding soft-nosed bullet doesn't kill significantly faster than a full metal jacket, aka full patch bullet, does. This adds to the amount of evidence that moderate increases of damage may have little effect, but a larger increase of damage can be the difference between killing in minutes and killing in seconds. A 45 hollow point's larger wound size is an advantage in that it may damage a blood vessel or organ that a smaller 9mm round may barely miss. This advantage is undeniably real, but realistically speaking, it would be difficult to try to measure such a thing. Larger calibers do have a significant advantage though. A jacketed hollow point with a larger bullet diameter has a greater ability to penetrate through barriers due to its thicker sidewall metal. This is far easier to measure and could arguably be more important than the larger wound channel in this situation that a gunfight occurs in a parking lot of a convenience store and both parties may be near vehicles. I should also mention that if you use Extreme Defender ammunition, your rounds will have good barrier penetration basically regardless of caliber. Likewise, this chart demonstrates that in actual flesh, 9mm plus P plus Extreme Defender rounds can equal or outperform a 45 ACP plus P of the same design, but not a 45 Super. The reason for this is because the bullet design directly inflicts more damage with increased velocity, so higher velocity cartridges like 357 SIG, 10mm, and 9mm all greatly benefit from this bullet design. Finally, I actively try to find new perspectives and new evidence. So if I find new evidence that undoubtedly proves 40 or 45 to be better in some way, I will have no hesitation posting a new video about just that. The reason for this is obvious. Being objective and basing my conclusions directly off of evidence matters more to me than my personal preference for any caliber. When someone tells me that a 45 is best because it has the best balance of speed, power, and accuracy, I would want to ask, on what evidence are you basing this conclusion off of? If someone doesn't even allude to any evidence, then I can only conclude that this is only a matter of his personal opinion. Likewise, people who state that they have evidence but never actually show any should be heavily scrutinized. In comparison, I would rather show you evidence for the strengths and weaknesses of different calibers. Then you can see that my conclusions are somewhat reasonable, and you can also make your own off of this evidence.